Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Clark, and today's database administrator virtual chapter presentation is going to be on PowerShell for the DBA. Our speaker today is going to be the wonderful David Cobb, and we once again want to note our sponsor is Hewlett Packard for today's presentation, and we want to thank Hewlett Packard for coming alongside of us and partnering with us so we can provide these webinars. Technology helps us, reach out to more and more folks, but there are some overheads, and they do help offset that, and we do want to appreciate and thank them for all their hard work. The virtual chapter is, this virtual chapter is one of very many virtual chapters, part of the larger PASS organization. There's language-based virtual chapters, there's technology-based, there's locale-based, geography-based, so to speak, cloud. And today's topic is about PowerShell. There's also a PowerShell virtual chapter, which I'm sure we'll hear about more later in David's presentation. So the virtual chapter here that we're doing today, it is just one of the things that we have going on as part of PASS. We have a SQL Saturday, which is an all-day SQL event. They're around the U.S. as well as the world. This slide shows the upcoming events that will be happening in the next month and a half or so. There seems to be about 6 or so in the U.S. coming up, from Minnesota down to Orlando. EMEA, Latin America, as well as over in Auckland and Bangladesh. So they're around the world. If they're close to you, go check out the SQLSaturday.com website, and you can see the agenda. You can register. You can get more information about that. At that website, there's also the ability to download previous SQL Saturday information. So if there's a topic that you weren't able to catch anyplace else, you can go to SQLSaturday.com and see if it was talked about there and get the presentation from there. So another great resource in the SQL world. The biggest event that PASS does is the summit. It's an annual summit. It happens once a year. This year it's going to be up in Seattle again, and it's the end of October. The full summit registration is $23.95. If you use this registration code here on the screen, you can save $150 on your current registration. So if you want to find out more information about that, you can go to SQLpass.org and click on the summit, and it'll give you registration information. It'll show you the current schedule, the different tracks that are going to be there, the speakers. It's got quite a lot of information to help you plan out your trip to the PASS Summit. There's also a section on how to present this to your management team if they might be a little resistant to this stuff. You might have experienced that in the past. There's a couple sections there on how to talk to your management team or finance folks and the value of PASS. So that's also a very good resource. I've used that previously as well. And then finally, there's also physical chapters. Everything we've talked about so far is kind of online or here or random times throughout the year. This local chapter, they're generally monthly or bi-monthly. A lot of benefits to that. If you're interested in being a part of that, if you go to SQLpass.org and click on the local chapter link, you can get more information on that. If you see there's not a chapter that's close to where you are, you can start one. One nice thing about being a volunteer-run organization is it's very dynamic and fluid. We can do a lot of things. So if you're interested in being involved, that's great. If you want to start one, that's even greater. And so if you go to SQLpass.org, all the information you need will be there. And like I said, it's a volunteer-run organization. If you have any desire, small or great, to be involved with the PASS organization, again, if you go to SQLpass.org, you'll say, I want to volunteer, but there's a button there. You can also email it to the address here on the screen, but I try and send people to SQLpass.org because everything's there. And so be involved. We have a lot of presence on Al Gore's internet, and so you can take advantage of that in LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and then the PASS website itself. So with that, I'd like to kind of bring our focus back to today's session. Today's session is, again, a PowerShell for the DBA. By the poll that we had at the very beginning of this of the seminar, it shows that 12% of the folks online use PowerShell for managing 10 or more SQL instances. 5% use it for 1 to 10 instances. 53% use it on a limited basis. 30% say they can spell it. And no one says that they have no need for PowerShell. We use something else. So that was a surprising number for me, that there's not some other thing that people want to use instead of PowerShell, which is fine. PowerShell is powerful. But and with that, I do want to kind of introduce David today. He's spent many years getting ready for this presentation. He loves to learn. He solves problems with technology. Talking with him earlier, I can see he does enjoy teaching others to do the same. I've learned a lot just chatting with him before the session today. He's a system architect for checkout payment solutions. He's a Microsoft certified trainer. Excuse me here. He also has founded a principal consulting for Cobb Information Technologies. It's been in existence since 1999. They focus on SQL Server backed solutions and automation. He's also a technical reviewer for SQL Server and PowerShell books. So we're getting someone who really knows this stuff here today, and that's really great. Besides playing with technology, David lives in Boca Raton, Florida. We will not hold that against him. I'm in California, so I think it's heaven on earth. But having a lot of family in Florida, it's a good second home, so to speak. But David hails from there, and he seems to enjoy it. And with that, I'd like to turn the session over to David so he can give us his presentation. And David, we're looking forward to it, sir.
Great, Mike. Thank you so much. Hey, guys. Hey, everybody. So thanks for joining the webinar. And so Mike gave you the information, my background, the content, and the things that we're going to talk about today. There's a lot of information. But I really want to get across the fun of this. This is a technology that I've been working with since it came out in SQL 2012. And man, I just have so much fun playing with the PowerShell as it develops, as modules come out. And there's really great resources, free and paid resources out there to learn it. And so there's a lot to learn. There's a big learning curve. I'm hoping that today's session will help you get over the hump and get started, or if you're already started, give you information you don't have. But I really want to translate my idea of PowerShell is that it's virtual Legos. So I'm back to being a kid again sometimes when I'm working with PowerShell. How do I get this piece to connect to this piece? How do I build something with these building blocks that have been provided to me? So if I can communicate that to you, if you have fun learning this and actually accomplishing something for your organization, automating things, saving them time, saving them money, building new products with it, well, that's just a bonus. But if we can have fun doing our work, that's the best part of it. So my goals today, we're going to just cover the basics of PowerShell. Can't get into the depths, but I'm going to try to show you a lot. And I do tend to go fairly quickly, so I'll try to take some questions at the end of each script that I go through, or at the end. But I'll be providing these scripts and providing you guys resources for later learning. So if you don't think as fast as I talk, that's okay. You'll have time to research and play with these things on your own. So we'll get into SQL management objects. That's really the key when you're working with PowerShell and you're interacting with SQL Server, understanding these SQL management objects and how you can leverage them in your scripts. How can you use modules that leverage these to get work done with your SQL Server. Working with data, pulling data in and out of SQL Server with PowerShell, and we'll also look at some cool tools out there for the DBA. And I will focus very much on code. As a matter of fact, I really don't have any more slides for this presentation. We're going to dive right in to the code. So, and all this code, I'm working with the PowerShell ISE, as you can see here. So I've got several scripts open. If you've never seen this before, and I don't expect that some of you have a command line interface for PowerShell, basically the PowerShell console, that looks a lot like the DOS prompt from the old days. But when you're working with scripts in PowerShell, you really want to learn the PowerShell ISE, the integrated scripting environment. There's other tools, but this comes with Windows. This will be on the machines you're working on, and it's a great starting place to learn and to manage your PowerShell scripts. So, and as I said before, all the scripts as I go through here, I will provide a link at the end of our presentation. So that's the background information there. Let's just jump right in. So when I'm working with PowerShell, any variable, we start off with scripting language, we look at variables first. Any variable is going to start with a $sign, and you start off with several variables already in place. This PS version table, I'm using this as an example to show you what version of PowerShell I'm running. So you can see I'm running version 5.1. I have Windows 10 installed. I'm on the latest and greatest. But the things that we're learning today are going to be applicable in prior versions. So if you're on Windows 7, Windows 8, you can use this. You can even set up PowerShell on machines as old as Server 2003 if you want to go through a lot of extra work to patch those servers. So even if you're not on the latest, greatest, I guess I would say after version 3, you're going to see most of the functionality that you expect. And when you see scripts out there, if you're in version 3 or higher, that's a good place to start. But try to use the latest one that you can and that's supported in your server environment. So I have the script that's showing up here, and I have several tabs for all the scripts I have open. And I have the console output window here on the bottom. So when I highlighted this PS version table, notice it's a $sign in front of it. Okay, it's a variable. Notice that it's highlighted orange. Okay, so the ISE is going to give me some formatting to help me understand and read my scripts. And then I get my result down here on the bottom when I execute that statement. So I can just highlight it, and I can either click Run Selection here, or if I want to run the whole script, I can do that. So the shortcut key for running the whole script is F5. Typically, you don't want to do that. Typically, when you're working with a script, you're kind of walking through step by step. Get in the habit of pressing F8. I know in Management Studio, you're going to be used to highlighting text and hitting F5. It's not going to do what you expect. It's going to run the whole script. So that's a habit you have to break when you're working with PowerShell. We're going to use F8 when we run these commands. So when I select a line here, let's say this line 15, if I press F8, I'm going to define a variable X, I'm setting it to 1. Okay. If I run that variable, it'll give me back the result. What is X? X is 1. Okay, so I'm getting back that result. I can define a variable Y. I'll set it to ABC. And I can request that back as well. So I didn't need to type these. I just defined it, and I have a variable with a value. Okay, so when I run this, there's my value. So what do I actually have? What's actually in that variable? So the first commandlet I'm going to show you is GetMember. And all your commandlets are going to have a verb with a hyphen and then a noun. So I'm going to get member. So if I take this X and I use this pipe, okay, so people that work with Bash, Unix environment are going to be very familiar, and you're going to want to get familiar with it too when you're in PowerShell. I can pass the result from one statement to another statement. So I'm going to take that variable X, I'm going to pass it into GetMember. So when I run this statement, I get the output from GetMember. And GetMember tells me that this has a type. It's a system.int32. So that's a type that we pull out of .NET framework. Okay, so all the types, all the objects that we work with are all based on the .NET framework. So if you have any background with programming, any experience with the framework, you'll be able to apply that to working with PowerShell. And reverse is true. As you start learning about things here in PowerShell and you go working with these objects in C# or VB.NET, it's the same objects. Okay, it's the same framework. And I also get information about this object, including the methods that it supports. So I could convert this value to character or to double. I can compare it. I can access all these methods that are built in to the framework. Okay, so that's the result of looking at the X variable, okay, this Y variable here, and I don't have to select the whole line. I can just put my cursor on it here and hit F8. Y is a system.string. So I didn't have to type it. It looks at the value and comes up with a type. Okay, I can also define a type when I declare the variable, but if I don't, it will make a good assumption based on the data that I put into that variable of what kind of data type it should have. So because it's a data type in the framework, I can access methods like the length method. So I can get the length of my string. The length of my ABC string is 3. I can take a value, call a method, the toString method, and then pipe that into GetMember. So I take my integer, I turn it into a string. If I send that to GetMember, I see that now I've turned it into a string. So I can then interact with all the string methods that I have access to. And again, this is all from the .NET framework. So I want to use replace. I'm going to take the ABC and replace A's with Z's. I can do that and get a result. So right away, I don't have to do this from scratch. I can leverage the entire power of the .NET framework in what I'm doing. So when I'm working with values and variables, you might be familiar when you're creating expressions in SQL. Maybe you're combining multiple values, maybe in an error message or maybe in something to put into a text field. And you have to combine numeric and character data types. You always have to convert them into the same or familiar data types to get that to work. But PowerShell will do that for me. So I'm going to define a variable here, Z, and I'm going to use this string. I want to see what is the value of X and what is the value of Y. Okay, and you'll notice that that highlighting is a little different there. You'll see that this little backtick character, and you can barely see it, but that backtick character is an escape character. That's the top left key on your keyboard below the escape key. And that tells PowerShell, don't treat this like a variable, treat it as a literal value. So when I run this and look at the value in the Z variable, I can output $X is 1 and $Y is ABC. Okay, so you'll need to know about that escape character when you're composing messages for logging or displaying to the user. It's very simple once you get some of the basics to output information as strings, as character values to the user. All right, so we'll talk about variables more as we go along. Let's just jump right into another command.
Got a quick question for you, David.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of them here. One quick one here, I think. How did you start PowerShell Console?
That's a good question. So when I click on the Start button here, actually when you right-click nowadays and you go to Command Prompt Admin, okay, you'll, on a server environment, I would actually get PowerShell. Right now I'm on a desktop environment, so I'm getting the command prompt. But later versions of Windows Server, they're replacing the console. If I click on the window here and I just type in PowerShell, okay, I can run the Windows PowerShell. This is the console, and then the Windows PowerShell ISE. So that's what I'm using. I'm using both the ISE, the scripting, integrated scripting environment for doing my development, but I can also come into the console and work here. Actually, I have another one open that already has the the size is a little bit better. So if I want to do A equals 1 and then $A, I'm working in the console against PowerShell. But it's not a good development environment. It's good to work with scripts I've already created to fire off stuff that's already working, but it's hard to work with an existing script in this. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yep, another one. Do variables have specific types, or are they based on a current value in the variable?
So when I defined these, it inferred from the value that I was giving it what it wanted it to be. But you can also type. You can say, I want this value to be a string. $W is equal to whatever it is, and I can strongly type my variables that way. That's right. So if I want
dynamic, can you put a integer in it at one time and then just character the next?
Yeah, you would redefine it. So right now, if I can come in and say W is equal to 1, now I've redefined that variable. It's not going to stop me from doing that.
Got it.
I just basically overrode it. So yeah, I guess I would call that dynamic.
Yep. And so does .NET framework need to be installed to use PowerShell? That's the last question.
That's a good question. So when it's a dependency, when you install PowerShell, what you're looking for is the Windows Management Framework. So if I look for WMF, Windows Management Framework, the latest version right now is 5 dot something. Let's see, I'm getting other things. WMF, PowerShell. And I have some links to this, how to set it up, how to get my installation started. But it's the Windows Management Framework. And I'll provide you some links to how do I set this up, what are my minimum requirements, and so forth. But it'll show you, hey, if you want to run Framework 4.0, here's the operating systems that are supported, here's the frameworks that we need, and so forth. So WMF4 requires .NET Framework 4.5. I was going to mention this a little further down, but have a look here. I'm going to provide a reference to a great blog. One of the better PowerShell blogs that I've enjoyed working with is Mike Robbins. So he actually hosts a PowerShell user group in Mississippi. It's the Mississippi PowerShell user group. And they also provide that online. So you don't have to be in Mississippi to go to his user group, and he's a phenomenal blogger. And he looked at, hey, here's all the various versions of PowerShell and what the default version is with those operating systems. So for instance, if I'm running on Windows 7, I'm going to default to PowerShell 2. But I can install up to 3 or version 4 if I'd like. So that's a good reference, and I'm including that in the scripts that I'm sharing with you guys. But yeah, it typically requires the Windows operating system, the .NET framework that it uses, and it'll prompt you to download that and install that if you don't have it. But that's good. Any other questions?
Okay, thanks. That's all for now.
All right, then we'll get more. Keep them coming. So let's jump into help. Okay, so every system has help. Here, if I run get help and without any parameters, okay, it tells me about how to use help. And you're going to get very familiar with this. The documentation for PowerShell is phenomenal for a lot of reasons. One, they have a standard structure. So any help document I pull up, a lot like man pages. I don't know, man pages, some of them are great in some Unix environments, some of them are very confusing. With help, I think they've struck a good balance of having something that's very thorough, but also easy to start using. So you get the information, basic description, longer description about the commandlet, how to find the help online. Any help that I look up can be updated and store it on my computer, so I don't have to have an internet connection, but any help that I'm requesting, I can also go online and get the latest version. So there's a provision here to be able to update help and always get the latest version of help. So as they're releasing commandlets, and as people learn how to use it, and they find edge cases, they improve the commandlet, they add to the documentation. And that's going to be continuously updated, and you're going to want to regularly update your help if you rely on it, or just use the online version. So when I run help, I see it down here in the console. Maybe that's not the best way to look at this document. I want to see it in a separate window. There's a show window parameter. So you'll see this parameter here. The hyphen is an indicator that this is a parameter. So hyphen show window for get help. When I run this, I'm going to get my help in a separate window. So if I've got multiple screens or a big screen, I can use this to look at the help as I'm working on my documentation. So I get a description of how it works, the various parameters, but I usually scroll right down to these examples. So it shows me how to use that feature with examples. I can just copy and paste and put them into my script. So I can get help on any commandlet, like GetMember. I can get help on various topics. So if I want to learn more about variables, I can use get help about underscore variables. I'll add the show window parameter here. And I can learn how variables work and at a very high level of detail. So the documentation is there and it's built in. You're going to use the internet, you're going to use the online documentation, and you can also use the built-in documentation as you're learning. Okay, and there's a lot of topics. Here is get help. I'm going to pass in this parameter about star. So here I'm going to get all of the parameter or all of the help topics that start with about. Okay, and you can see there's quite a lot of them. Okay, about modules, about methods, about logical operators. So they've done a great job of making this an explorable tool. So when I call the get help commandlet, I could specify whether I want to see examples. Maybe I want to get the online version. I can do that as well. So here it just shows me various examples of how to use get command. Wow, there's 14 examples here. If I want to see the help online, add the dash online parameter. So now it's going to go out to the web. Okay, so I get it from TechDeck. It takes me right to the right page. So I can go and see the help for various versions. 3 is the latest version that they're supporting right now in the documentation. And I can get the help that way. Okay, so you're going to spend a lot of time here. As you're learning, everything's new. You need to rely on help. And as you dig in deeper, you're trying to find new things to do with these tools, you'll be coming back to help again and again, and help is very good. So I'm going to say, now that I've looked at this get command commandlet, and I see that this tells me about the commands that I have available. So I'm going to call get command and look for anything that contains the word Sequel in the command. Okay, so there's a lot here. And you'll notice that when I look at these, you have the name of the command, and then also a version number, if I can scroll up to the top here, and also a source. So I'm working with modules. We're going to talk about these a little bit later. But these commands to deal with SQL, I can get these from various modules that are available to me. And we'll talk about how I can find and download these modules and use them. So notice that I have been calling the commandlets with parameters. Okay, and notice that sometimes I just give it a value after the command, like star SQL star. Sometimes I'm going to be calling commands and I'm going to be providing a hyphen with a parameter name and then the value. Okay, so both of these are valid. The first instance here, when I'm calling get command, I'm providing star SQL star, I'm providing that as a positional parameter. So most commands have a most common parameter that you're going to use. So the name of the parameter is the most common parameter, so it's set up as the first positional parameter. So if I call this and I just give it a value without providing a hyphen name, it assumes that it's the name. And I can look at the help for any of the commands. Let's go back to the online help here. And we'll see when we look at help, it gives us the syntax, it tells us about the parameters, and it tells us if there's a positional parameter available. So let me scroll down to name here. I can see the name parameter, which actually would accept an array of names. I can give it more than one, and it's the first parameter that it's going to look for if I'm passing in my parameters positionally. So you're going to see both ways. You're going to use SQL with named parameters where I specify the name, and you're going to see commands with positional parameters where I just pass it in and it figures out which parameter this is. So get command lists a lot of SQL commands. We're going to look at a few of these a little bit later. There are, in addition to these commands, there are also aliases, more than we're going to get into here. Let me find a particular alias that makes sense. Here is alias, get alias, for the definition of get child item. So what is this? Get child item is a very commonly used commandlet that will give you the items in a certain location, whether it's the files in a folder or it's the registry keys in a registry entry. You'll find that it's the same thing as doing a directory in Windows or doing LS in Unix. And they've also provided a third shortcut here, GCI. So if I'm typing out my PowerShell, maybe I'm not going to want to type get hyphen child item, and I just want to do a dir, or I'm going to do an ls. Aliases make it simple to use commands we're already familiar with. So I can come down here and type in ls and list out my scripts, or I can type in dir, or I can type in get child item. It's the same thing. Okay, and I always get those results. And then a lot of times you'll have GCI as another alias here. So you'll see these 3-letter or 2-letter aliases that they've created for a lot of these. So that's most useful when you're writing out your PowerShell by hand. It's a good best practice. If you're writing out a script, skip the aliases, go ahead and use the full command. This makes it easier to read and maintain. We can use get command, and I'm going to show off another feature here of the PowerShell ISE. If you look over here on the right, I've got a tab here. This is the command tab. So if I close this, I can come back up here to view, show command add-on, and I have a way to type in commands, and it knows about all of them that are loaded into my PowerShell session. And I could select that command, and down here I have a GUI that maps to each parameter that this will accept. So the command tab inspects the parameter, or expects the command, like grabs the parameters, and then builds a graphic user interface for you on the fly. So I can use this instead of having to type it, which is phenomenal. When you're first starting to use PowerShell, the hardest thing is, what do I type? I don't know how to spell things. I don't know what parameters to expect. This gets you over that hump by giving you a graphical user interface. So if I'm looking at this commandlet here, I want to see there's various parameter sets that it will accept, different ways to use that command. So if I say put in the name here, star Sequel star, okay, I can run that. And then that's the same result as what I just did here. And just like other consoles, I can hit up arrow here and show you that it's just took my input from the GUI, runs the command for me. I can even get this console to come up, this GUI to come up on demand. So if I run the show commandlet, it'll pop it up for me. So I can just fill it in right here. If I don't have the command window open, I fill in the blanks, I run my command. Okay. So I can also pass in different parameters here. I can see, like, I can provide nouns, I can provide verbs to see, okay, show me commands that deal with the noun module. So I have things like find module, install pump module, and so forth. So I can use get command to find out what's possible. What are the commands that I have that work with this or that object? And get module, it's one of the commands here that's listed, can show me, hey, what modules are available. Okay, so I've actually set up a lot of various modules on my machine. You're going to see something else when you run this command, but there is the ability in PowerShell to install other modules that you find online. Maybe you deal with Azure, maybe you deal with Exchange or SharePoint, VMware. In addition to the SQL Server modules we'll talk about, there's hundreds of modules out there. And I can see the various modules. You can see I've been playing around with Azure a little bit. Also, AWS has its own modules to work with. AWS PowerShell. So if you want to work with Amazon, it's out there. So you're going to see this as people present software to work in the Windows platform. And now that it's opened up to Linux, we'll see this for other Linux tools as well. Now that you have PowerShell on Linux, the product will come out with PowerShell modules to support that product. So the time you invest in PowerShell is going to help you work with any current or future technology on this platform. So I'm also going to show you Find module. So they've released something called PowerShell Get. So before PowerShell Get, if you found a module that you'd liked, you go to a website and download a zip. You unzip it. There's a set of folders in your machine that you can put those modules into that will let you to work with those various modules, but it's kind of a manual process. And PowerShell Get is very much like apt-get in Linux or NuGet if you're a Visual Studio developer. And it lets you access a gallery of online modules. Okay, so the find module commandlet will let you capture, if I'll run this now, this might take a few moments, all the available modules that are out there. So what's neat about this is it vastly simplifies, first of all, finding what's available, and then also, downloading it and installing it, getting it working, making sure that I have the latest module. So the PowerShell Get, which they've introduced in version 5, but you can get this for version 3, and vastly simplify your work when it comes to using these modules that are out there. So what modules do I have? So notice what I've done here. I've called this commandlet, but instead of just looking at the result, I actually stored it in a variable. So this is useful to me because now I don't have to keep calling out and keep waiting for the result. When I want to work with these modules, I could just pipe that module to, or the list of modules, to format table. So here is a very common commandlet that takes a result set and gives it to you in a nice table. So we're not going to be able to even scratch the surface of what the modules that are out there right now. But if I look at this in another commandlet, out grid view, Maybe you're thinking, I don't really like this whole command line thing. I'd like to see a GUI in my output. Out grid view gives that to you. Okay, so it's just a collection of objects. I pipe it into this out grid view, and now I can see it. It's something that I can scroll through. I can filter. So you'll see up here I can click on these various column headers to sort it, a lot like Excel. I can specify criteria. I would like criteria on the name. I would like the name to contain the word Sequel. And now I can filter that result and look at all of the various modules out there that deal with Sequel. So a really neat tool, the Outgrid View, to look at information and sift through a lot of information. All right, so it's a whirlwind tour of the basics of PowerShell. So I said before that PowerShell is based on .NET. So we have these various types, and I can grab those types. They're actually stored as assemblies. And I'll find that there's 115 various assemblies available to me right now, and I can always add more if I want to find them and add them. But I'm going to grab the assemblies and select a part of that assembly. So assembly is a collection of objects, and each of these objects has lots of properties, like name, like source. I'm going to select the manifest module property. I'm going to pipe that into another command that does sort, just like order by in a SQL statement. And then I'm going to put it out to a grid. So this whole line here, taking a variable, calling 3 different commandlets, okay, and in one line of code, I can go through and see, hey, show me my assemblies that are out there. So there's lots of assemblies dealing with PowerShell. I have SQL Server on my machine, so I have a lot of SQL Server modules, presentation framework, system core, system data. I can see what assemblies are available to me. So when you look at this line, this is called a one-liner. I'm doing a lot of stuff on one line, and I can use the pipe to tie each of those into the next statement. So you'll see that very commonly. It's kind of fun to see how much you can get accomplished with one line of PowerShell code. So one last thing I'm going to show you here is I'm looking at creating all these variables here, assemblies and my module variables. It's useful to be able to look at these variables. And when I come down to here and I type in something like assemblies, okay, I can see the results of my object, but again, it's a little hard to manage. It's in the console, it's a little unwieldy, and I'd like to have an easier way to look at those variables. In addition to extending PowerShell with commandlets, you can extend the PowerShell ISE. They have add-ons for the PowerShell ISE, and I'm providing a link here to one of my favorites here, the Variable Explorer. So I've already downloaded this, and I've already imported it. So import module says, hey, it's a module out there in my system. Go ahead and pull it into my session. And I've already done that. And when you run this, you get this new tab here, this Variable Explorer. So in addition to interacting with my variables from my script or from the command line here, I can see all of the local variables in my session. So if I want to pick something like assemblies here, I can drill into that object. So it's a collection. So here's the first entity in that collection. And I can see the individual properties. If there was another collection here, I can drill into that. So this makes it a lot easier as you start working with these objects, and sometimes you need a collection within the object or properties within the object. I find those by navigating through them with the Variable Explorer. So it's a nice handy tool. It's the first thing I install when I set up PowerShell ISE. All right, so we're going to jump into working with SQL. Any other questions before we go on to our next script here?
Yes, sorry, I was trying to get unmuted here. Couple things here, let me get to it. Some folks are having a little bit of a problem getting update help to work. Is there something that you need to do to make that work?
Okay, I'll give you a hint. Up here in the upper left, you notice I'm running this as administrator. For most of the stuff that you want to do in PowerShell, you want to be running as administrator. And update help is one of those things. You'll get an access denied message often if you can't do update help. And I didn't run it now because it can take a few minutes because it has to pull down all those help files. But you'll, if you run, just right-click Run as Administrator, try the update help again.
Okay.
That's the simplest way to do it.
They'll give that a shot. Let us know here. Where does it go search for the modules? Is there any risk of getting something that's not proper or viruses, etc., from being downloaded? Or
yeah, you do have that risk, and so ultimately you're responsible for anything that you're downloading from the internet. Okay, so when you go to like things like the PowerShell gallery, it's use at your own risk. If you found the if you go look in the fine print at the bottom, I'm sure you're going to find something written by a lawyer that says, hey, we're not responsible for something that blows up your computer. And you know what? That comes with the territory. You can choose to use modules that have a lot of good feedback. You kind of avoid modules that don't have as much use. Maybe you want to pick ones that are only recommended to you. To make those kind of decisions on your own. But yeah, but ultimately you're using code that somebody else put up there. So I rely a lot on the number of downloads and what other people are using to know, hey, this is something I want to learn, or this is something I want to try versus something I want to avoid. That's a good question.
Yep. All right, so you're going to be getting into the Sequel piece of PowerShell, so I'd like to try and capture as much as that. So we'll hold off questions to the end.
Okay, very good. So when I work with Sequel, another concept I want to get across is the PS provider. So think of a provider as an interface that exposes any data store as though it was a file system. So the same way that you change folders, you create folders, create files, you might want to interact with the registry the same way, or your environment variables, your file systems, and so forth. So all of these different providers that are listed here can be exposed and navigated through as though they were a file system. So for instance, I can look at my registry key for HK current user. Here's what's in my console key. Here's what's in my variables. Okay. Here's what's in my environment. Okay. So that PowerShell provider makes it real easy to interact with different aspects of your server. So when I work with modules, the environment variables, and I want to access a particular environment variable, for instance, the PS module path. So it's env colon PS module path. That'll show me here's all the locations, a lot like the path you have in your console or in your MS-DOS prompt that shows you here's the locations I'm going to look for a given module. So when I look at the available SQL modules that I have available, I'll run this and send it out to the grid view here. We're going to look at the SQL PS module. So that's the module they released with SQL Server 2012, and it's been updated and carried forward, SQL 2014, SQL 2016. And then also the SQL Server module. So this is new. If you go in and download, which is, everybody should do this, go get SQL Management Studio 2016. It comes with the SQL Server module. They left the SQL PS module as is. They've created the SQL Server module, and the future work is going to be done in the SQL Server module. That's directly from the Microsoft team. And then you also have SQL AS commandlets. These are commandlets just for dealing with analysis services. So we're going to look at those, and then one other community module I think you should check out. Okay, so right now, if I come in and import this SQL PS module, that's going to take it from my computer and install it into my session. So right now, even though it's on my computer, I can't use those modules, commandlets, until I import it into my session. And you might notice that this takes a little while. Okay, it's slow. It gives me these error messages. I actually have these error messages because I have the Azure commandlets also loaded, and there's some conflicts there. It gives me these crazy warnings. And notice that it changed my prompt. When I do a directory on this prompt, I'm now into the PowerShell provider for SQL Server, okay, which is great. And we're going to look at this. But the fact that I loaded the module and that it switched me into that is an inconvenience. Now I'm out of my C drive. I'm into my SQL Server. So no other modules do this. So people complained about that. I don't like it either. So I have to actually set locations. You can think of that as CD or change directory. Set my location back to C to get out of there. So if I go and look at get command, I can pass in the module parameter for SQL PS. Now I have a list of all of the commands I can run within the SQL PS module. So a lot of things here dealing with availability groups, smart administration, dealing with replicas, the availability groups, endpoints, stopping starting instances, dealing with the firewall. So there's a lot of useful modules there. And especially if you're automating your own availability groups, you're going to find that there's a lot of things that you can only do or that are most convenient to do within PowerShell. And here's a fun trick. If I take this command here, I wrap it in parentheses, I can then access it because it's a collection. I can access this count method, and I can count, and I can see that I have 47 different commandlets and other items listed there. So a lot of commands. We're only going to look at a couple of these. There's just not enough time. I'm going to remove that because I want to install the later SQL PowerShell. I have SQL 2014 and SQL 2016 installed on this machine. So I have two SQL PSs, and it's installing the earlier one. And I want to use the later ones. You notice this version 1 for all of these. If I do import module, I actually can look at my system, and one of the folders that's in my path, there's a modules directory under PowerShell, under tools, in my installation of SQL. If I provide that fully qualified name, it'll pull in the PowerShell commandlets from this particular module. So if there's any confusion on which one it is, this eliminates that confusion. The fully qualified name. You'll also notice I have some blue content down here, this verbose content. I've added a verbose tag. So commandlets have a set of parameters that's common among them, and verbose lets me see under the hood what's happening with this. It's good for troubleshooting. It's good for understanding exactly what's happening. So I can see it's loading a PS snap-ins DLL. I can see the commandlets it's importing, PS provider DLL, various scripts that are being run, and then it's exporting these. It's making these available to me in my PowerShell session. Okay, but you'll notice that when I did that, it didn't change my directory. It didn't take very long, and I'm still in the C drive, so they've actually improved that. As far as the commands, they're pretty much the same, but it's faster and it doesn't change your prompt location. So they have made some changes, and those were things that were suggested by the community and acted on. So there hasn't been much motion on this until SQL 2016. Now we're seeing them respond. They actually have SQL Connect items. They have a Trello board. You can go and see the things that they want. They want community feedback on, hey, what do you want to see from PowerShell and SQL? And they're gathering that feedback in there. So I'm going to grab those variables, grab those and look them, or not variables, those commandlets, and look them in a grid view here so I can see my various commands that are available to me here. We're just going to look at one here. We're going to look at the backup SQL database command. I'm going to skip some of these things for time. But I also want to point out the new module, the import modules for SQL Server. So this is the new one that came out with SQL Management Studio. So if you download SQL Management Studio 2016, you'll get this module. I'm getting an error, and I realized it's because there's a type that it shares with the SQL PS module. So that I'm running into. I'm calling this remove type data here to solve that bug. Let's see if I can import it now. So I'm removing that type from my session. So now there's no longer a conflict. And I'll see very similar sets of functions here. Okay, so they haven't made much changes yet with this. They haven't added, they've added a couple small things, dealing with keys, but not a whole lot of change there yet. Okay, so I'm waiting for them to come up with more. So I talked a little bit about assemblies before. We think about these .NET objects that we're working with. Whenever you see a Microsoft.SQL Server .assembly, especially a lot of these management assemblies, okay, these are the SQL management objects, or SMO. So there's a whole reference online for this. This is how Management Studio and other applications that deal with SQL, those are how they interact with the servers themselves. So this is all very well documented. You'll see code samples to work with these objects, and whether you're in a framework language or in PowerShell, I can use these to interact with SQL Server. So if I want to use one of these, I can just pull it in individually. I can run SQL PS, it pulls, or if I import SQL PS or import SQL Server modules, it'll pull in all of these modules, all of these assemblies for me. Or I can import them individually with the add type command. So when I run this, I'm now able to use this type, this Microsoft SQL Server SMO type, in my PowerShell code. Okay. So let's look at a couple of code examples here. First, let's look at the backup SQL database. So if I run show command with backup SQL database, it will give me a GUI, so I can fill in the blank and just type in the database that I want to work with. If I want to provide the server instance in the database, remember each of these tabs is a different parameter set, a different way of using that same command. So here I'm going to run backup SQL database with the what if parameter. So this says, tell me what you would do if I ran this command. So as you start working in production, you realize, hey, I'm not sure this is going to work. I can use what if, and these commandlets will tell me, hey, if you did this, what would it do? Well, it would perform the backup SQL database operation on this target. So I can use what if to test my commands before I actually run them. So here's a command. I'm going to run backup SQL database. I provide my database, name of my server, this is the name of my local machine, and then a parameter for the backup file. And notice here I'm getting a little fancy. I'm actually using get date, another command that's available to me. It provides a date, and I'm using the format command here, -f. Strings have a format capability. So I'm using the same thing I would use in .NET to format the date in this year, month, day, hour, minute, second. So it's easy to make a timestamp in my file name. So I'm going to go run Internet Explorer. I'm going to look in my backup folder here. Okay, and I can see my backup that just got run. Okay, So real easy to use, that backup SQL database. When we look at our PowerShell providers, notice that you have this new PowerShell provider here from SQL Server. Okay, so I can use this to navigate within my server. So I can set my location, basically change the directory to SQL Server, set my location, so I can navigate. So notice my path here. Now I'm in SQL Server, within SQL, on this server. In my default instance, I'm looking at my databases. I'm looking at my AdventureWorks database. Okay, so within this database, I have access to all the objects within those databases. So I can look at my tables, for instance. Okay, so those are the tables in AdventureWorks. So there's the way to work with the provider, and I can do a lot with that. I can explore and kind of navigate to the point that I need to work with within Management Studio. You might notice, if you've ever explored it within your Management Studio, you have the ability to right-click and start PowerShell, and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to open up a PowerShell prompt with the SQL PS already loaded and open you up into that same location within the application. So we have our PowerShell provider. Now let's look at how we can use these SMO types. So I'm going to create a server object, and I'm going to base it on this type, this SMO server type. Okay, so give it the name of my server. Okay, I create this object called server. Okay, and I'm going to pipe this to GetMember. I'm going to look at the properties of this object, and I'm going to show it here in the grid view. So as I scroll down through this, here's the various properties of my server. So I can come in and interact, find out what's the server type, what's my root directory, what roles are set up, what processors, what platform am I on. Okay, so I have access to all of those various properties. If I come over here to my Variable Explorer here, this server object, it's a little slow. I can drill into that actual object and see the various properties and their values. So what's my default file directory? What's my default log directory? What's my edition? All of those things are exposed to me within this object. I can grab the version. I can grab the edition of my server. Okay, we won't select star. It's going to take a little too much time. If I want to get the properties of the server that just relate to SQL management objects, okay, I have these here. So look at these names. Each of these types is a type that's built to interact with a certain property of your SQL server. So your availability groups, your backup devices, server events, okay, logins, mail, okay, there's an object for that. Again, SQL Management Studio, our favorite application, is just using these objects to interact with the server. As we need to deal with any of these objects, we can load and use these and then work with our server programmatically. Okay, so I can also do this with databases. I can look at my AdventureWorks database. Here are the various SMO objects that help me deal with different aspects of my databases. Triggers, indexes, full text indexes, and so forth. So it's all exposed. It's all there for me to work with and use. And again, I'm just leveraging the framework. I'm just using an existing type that they built into the .NET framework. Okay. So some tasks we could do here. Maybe I want to, again, create that same server object, and I'd like to change my server backup directory. So if I look at this backup directory, highlight this by itself, I can see my backup directory is set up on the C drive. I'm going to change it. I want to change it to the D drive, or it's already on the D drive. I'm going to change it to the C drive. Okay. Once I make that change, it actually won't take effect until I run alter. Okay. That invokes and commits the change. So I come into the properties of my server, switch over to Management Studio here. Okay. My backup directory is now on the C drive. So I just changed this setting without having to come in, not running T-SQL, not working with the GUI, just with a couple lines of code. So I can configure that. And if I want to set it back, which I do, I can just set it to the new value. Okay, so there's some other examples here. I'll leave these for you guys to explore, changing aspects of the databases and so forth. One of the objects you have available to you is the SMO scripting options object. And if you've ever gone into, right-clicked on a database and gone into script objects, you see a GUI there where you can script out tables or objects and get them in multiple files or one file and so forth. This script, and again, I'll leave this for you guys to play with, lets you interact with those same objects. So you could use this tool to script out your database. And I've already created this script folder and already run this elsewhere. Or if I come into here, I'm going to run Explorer. I'm going to open up my script folder. So here I've exported the tables in each of these databases. So I have a script to recreate those. So it's an easy way to document your database, easy to create migration scripts. We're just leveraging an object. And I'll leave this for you guys to review. I find a lot of things online. So whenever I found something useful, like here I'm referencing Rich Brown's blog, I'm adapting what other people have already figured out. I don't have to figure this out on my own. It's a documentation. I can look at this the SMO documentation online and build these things myself. But as I'm going to show you, there's a lot of great resources that you can leverage and adapt to your needs. Let's look at the SMO server object. Okay, this exposes a method. Okay, so I'm going to create an object for this and look at the methods on this object. And there's a lot of methods. So with a server object, I can do things like enumerate my locks. I can look at my error logs, my processes, attach, detach databases, make changes to the server. So this read error log method I'm going to use to look at the SQL error log. And this is a fun statement here. I'm doing a lot in one thing, but the where object, think of that as your where clause in your SQL statements. I'm looking at the text property, and I want it to match a particular log pattern. In this case, I'm looking for any log entries that deal with backups. I want to sort it on the log date. I would like to select the first 10, and then I'm going to pipe it to export CSV. So that does what you think it might do. It's going to send it out to a CSV file. So with this code, run it out. It's already done. I can look at that file name, and I can see my recent log entries from backups that have been run. If I want to email that to myself, so we have the send mail message commandlet. So I'm going to send that to myself in email. Okay, so I'm actually running a little local development SMTP server, and I can look at this mail message and see what it's sending me here. So again, just leveraging what's already in, what's already built in to PowerShell, using this simple send mail message to send it to myself. And so in addition to working with the SQL management objects, I can also use a set of commandlets that are built into PowerShell to get event logs. So I can look at the MS SQL Server events and grab the newest 100 events from that event log. So you have get event log, and now I'm talking to the Windows event log, or I can use SMO and talk to the SQL Server error log. And for like this, and like for anything else, when I'm working with a new object, I like to use my command window, type in the name of that object, and I can see the various modules that interact with that. How much time do I have, Mike?
We are pretty much having to wrap up here now. I have one or two questions I'd like to run in. So once you get to a sync point, we might have to. We'll work with Sharon to kind of do a part 2 to this. I think there's been a lot of interest in it.
I'd love to. There's a ton of things. So
Yeah.
Next time we'll dig into working with data. Some of the tools that are out there, I'm going to point you guys at DBA tools, and this is going to be in the reference list that I provide at the end. SQL PowerDoc, documenting your SQL servers. Here's some of the sample output I get from this to document my SQL servers with a freely available module from Kendall Van Dyke. And some fun stuff I've been doing. I've been playing with data, and I've been using the Google Chart Gallery. So how can I take data, make a web-enabled chart? Here, this is an example that makes a tree map of my data files, my database tables within a database. So yeah, I'd love to dig into this more. Lots to cover, and let's go ahead and show the guys and gals. Anybody that has questions, I'm going to share on the blog here. It's not there yet. I'm going to wait till we're all done. I'm going to put this Dropbox folder is going to contain the links. So daveslog.com, if you just go to presentations, PowerShell and SQL, that'll be here. And yeah, you get the contact information there and stuff. So there's lots to follow up. You got to get in there and get your hands on it. Go in and play. Find something small and automate it and learn in that process. Maybe it'll take you a couple days to do something that would have taken you 5 minutes in the GUI, but once you've got that script, you've got something that you can reuse.
Yeah,
so
and that's really that is really the final questions I kind of want to ask you is, folks have expressed quite an interest in learning more about PowerShell. What's the best way to do that? Courses are expensive, an online boot camp's $1,000. So forth. What would you recommend the best way for someone who to get into PowerShell and start coming up that learning curve?
All right, so if you're going to buy a book, the one book is this PowerShell Month of Lunches, and it's 30 lessons that fit in an hour, so you can learn at your desk. You've got, I don't know how much it is, maybe the ebook is $30 or $40. If you're going to spend money, that's where I would spend it. If you don't want to spend money, MVA, Microsoft Virtual Academy, they have a PowerShell Jumpstart. So you log in there with your Windows logon. They have hundreds of courses. There's probably a dozen or so directly related to SQL, maybe the same amount dealing with PowerShell for different technologies. So have a look at the Microsoft Virtual Academy. Jeff Hicks is one of many really phenomenal bloggers on PowerShell. They share what they know. They love the topic. They love to share it. He's kind of compiled a list of a lot of cool resources, free and otherwise. So you want to look there. And I can't stress this PowerShell ISE, this variable explorer. When you're digging in, this really helps you find your way around looking at the variables and the objects that you're dealing with. And then I'll list another bunch of things here on that page as well. One of the books I got to review, PowerShell Cookbook. So these cookbook technology books, they list different tasks and they give you a script. They give you the code, say here's how it works, and explain the whole thing. And you can grab that code and reuse it. Modify it for what you need. So if you have a book budget, we presented this at Code Camp this year. I don't know if this code still works, but they were giving us a 50% off code. Great tool. Donabelle Santos wrote that, so she's phenomenal. And if I find more resources, I'll put them up here. But you really can't go wrong with just these three first links here.
Okay, and with that, David, I'd like to say
Maybe
thanks, Dave. I appreciate that, man. It's a great presentation. I'm definitely in the newbie camp for PowerShell, so I've already got that book on my Amazon list here, PowerShell and a Month of Lunches book. With that, folks, I want to wrap up today. I want to say thank you for coming. Thank you for providing all the great questions. There's some that we didn't have a chance to answer. We'll capture those and try and answer them on the website. And this recording, as all recordings, will be located at the dba.sequelpass.org website with a link to download David's scripts and so forth. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming and see you in a couple of weeks.